All right. Well, it's 10:02. I think we should call it. So welcome everyone to the next step forward for affordable energy, advancing the Southeast Energy Insecurity webinar. Following the webinar, we'll send out the recording and slide deck to all registrants. You will also receive a follow-up survey to provide feedback on our webinar. If you have a question for our panel during the presentation, please submit it to the Q&A. Our presenters today are Will Bryan, Director of Research, and Cyrus Bedouar, Director of Policy. Please take it away, Will.
Yeah, thanks, Joy. And we're going to get the slide deck going here. But yeah, it's great to have all of y'all on the call early on a Monday morning. Yeah, we're thrilled with the response and excited to take you through the next steps for this very cool initiative that we've been working on now with a handful of stakeholders, including many of you, for more than a year now. Just a little background, if you aren't already familiar with SEEA. SEEA was founded in 2007, and we're the only regional energy efficiency organization serving the 11 states of the Southeast, really from Arkansas east to Virginia and Louisiana east to Florida and the states in between. And we do this by providing a number of core services. We provide research to stakeholders throughout the region. We provide consultation and education services. We manage programs throughout the region and provide information to stakeholders on best practices for that. We convene and facilitate stakeholders, which is much of what we're going to be talking about today. And then we also provide information on financial services and best practices for financing energy efficiency and clean energy throughout the Southeast. And Joy, I think we can go to maybe the fourth slide if you want, and I'll talk a little bit about the context that we're working in. Great. So the initiative that we're going to be talking about today and really kind of walking you through next steps for is very much focused on what SEEA and obviously Duke and a lot of other partners throughout the region see as a really key stumbling block for our region: energy insecurity. And this really just means difficulty accessing needed energy services, whether that's lighting, whether that's heating, whether that's cooling, whatever. Energy insecurity just indicates that a person has difficulty accessing that for potentially many different reasons. I wanted to give you just, before we really kind of dive into the initiative itself, I wanted to just give you a brief snapshot of the scale of this issue in the South, because energy insecurity really is endemic to the South in a lot of ways. It's more common among communities in our region than in any other part of the country, and more people in the South as a real number experience energy insecurity than in any other region in the country. So the magnitude of the problem here is large, and initiatives like this are critical if we want to begin to address it. So this is some data from the newest, about a month old, residential energy consumption survey, shedding light on kind of the magnitude of energy insecurity in our region and some of the kind of different aspects of that. If you look at the pie chart, the dark blue color indicates the southern census region, which is kind of similar to SEEA's territory. It's a little bit bigger than SEEA's territory, but it'll give you a sense of kind of what we're dealing with. And you can see, kind of what energy insecurity looks like in this region. And this is in millions of households. So, if we're talking about people, we're talking even more than we see here. So just to kind of walk you through, in our region, about 4.65 million households have to keep their home at an unhealthy temperature because they can't afford to do otherwise. About 5.6 million households have been disconnected or have had stop service notices. Almost 11 million households have had to reduce their consumption of food or medicine to pay for their energy. And then almost 5.3 million households in our region are unable to use heat or cooling equipment in the home at all. And so they're unable to cool or heat their temperature in their home. And 1 out of every 3 people in our region in general experiences energy insecurity. We're talking, more than 11 million households in the South. So the magnitude of the problem is big, and we need kind of big solutions to begin to address it. And that is really, I think, what brings us to what we're going to be talking about today. And Joy, if we go to the next slide, we can dive into that. And I want to give you just a little bit of background on this initiative before we begin to think about next steps and think about how we can engage all of you in those next steps. This is an initiative that did not start with SEEA. It started with Duke's Nicholas Institute for Environmental Policy Solutions back in 2020, and a handful of other initial stakeholders who were involved, including Appalachian Voices and the North Carolina Justice Center. And these groups, realized that energy insecurity is a problem of great magnitude in our region, and that we need collaboration with stakeholders from many different sectors to begin to address kind of all facets of it. And so to that end, staff at Duke's Nicholas Institute designed a program really to facilitate stakeholder engagement, to identify and develop solutions to many of the issues that we see both causing and kind of the effects of energy insecurity. And so the first and second phases of this project, which have wrapped up, were really intended to measure and characterize, what are the causes and what are the impacts of energy insecurity on communities throughout the Southeast. And you can see, how the initiative defined the Southeast there, to devise sustainable regional solutions that can address energy insecurity, and then to convene and facilitate collaboration between people from the many different sectors that are involved in actually, addressing energy insecurity throughout the region. And so that was really kind of the goals of the first and second phases. Next slide, please, Joy. And so the project team initially, there were a number of phases to this project. The project team initially, reached out to stakeholders throughout the region to build a regional network and to build, to kind of solicit information on, what does energy insecurity look like, and what are barriers to addressing energy insecurity, and what are promising solutions. And phase 1 and 2 kind of look like this in terms of the timeline. The first step that the project team at Nicholas and Appalachian Voices and the Justice Center took was really to understand what is the problem, what is the magnitude of the problem in a much more holistic way than we have understood before. And so that first phase really played out through, January, first quarter of 2021, January through May of 2021, and involved pretty intensive research and data analysis to understand the gaps of our understanding in energy insecurity, the gaps in data potentially that exists. The project team completed a household energy burden survey, which we're going to be, talking a little bit more about today. And the Environmental Justice Lab at Duke University started a household level energy burden mapping, which, we have energy burden often in aggregate, but we don't really understand at the household level, what do things look like? And so, all of this was kind of a significant step forward for understanding the problems that the region was facing, and it began laying a groundwork and a foundation for how we actually address them. In May of 2021, through a series of stakeholder conversations, staff at the Nicholas Institute, worked to create kind of a shared understanding of energy and security challenges, and what, potential solutions to those would be, and to actually kind of build a broad stakeholder network of different groups from many different sectors focused on, how do we actually reduce energy insecurity in our region. And, through a series of 6 working groups that met between May and November of 2021, the project team developed a draft set of recommendations on policies, programs, initiatives that could potentially address various aspects of energy insecurity in the Southeast. And I'm going to be reviewing the recommendations today and just talking through kind of what are the next steps for those, but we'll talk about those in a few minutes. And then finally, kind of at the final workshop in December of 2021, the staff, clarified and refined the final recommendations, and then generated some additional insights and data from stakeholders who were involved, and began to shift to the next phase, phase 3 of this initiative, which is really taking those recommendations and implementing them. Taking the solution sets that stakeholders throughout our region who have been engaged in these issues for years have identified as promising, and working to put those into practice on the ground. And we're going to talk more about sort of how that plays out. But, just to kind of bookend this, I guess, in that final, final wrap up of the initiative, the Nicholas Institute and Appalachian Voices and the Justice Center, decided that the initiative needed a permanent home, and SEEA was selected as the permanent home. And so SEEA officially has taken over the initiative and will be kind of moving forward, especially with this phase 3 implementation phase. And that's I think really what we're going to be chatting about today. And we'd love to get feedback on what that looks like and how we move forward with that from all of you on the call today. Thanks. Joy, next slide, please. And I want to really thank a few people before we kind of get into the meat of it. This was a really heroic effort by the Nicholas Institute to put together a ton of different stakeholder groups. I think in the end, there were more than 60 different groups represented throughout the initiative, which is amazing. And it really ran the gamut from utility companies. You can see, Dominion, Duke, Southern, Electric Cooperatives of South Carolina, NRECA. So we had, investor-owned utilities, cooperatives represented. We had, a variety of NGOs and consumer groups, the Mountain Association, Tennessee Interfaith Power and Light, ACEEE, Virginia Poverty Law Center. We had a number of staff from local, state, and federal agencies who were involved as well, from, US EPA, the Office of Regulatory Staff in South Carolina, the United States Department of Energy, and the city of Savannah, among many others. And then we also had financial institutions, which I think, helped refine many of the recommendations for how we actually fund and implement these solution sets. So that includes the Alliance for Affordable Energy, the Solar Energy Loan Fund, and others. So I want to thank anyone who was involved in the process, and especially thank Jen and Allie at the Nicholas Institute, who really were the kind of leading the charge for this effort and coordinating it throughout the life of it while it was at the Nicholas Institute. Next slide, please. We had a number of advisory board members, and I want to kind of take a second. We have several of them on the call today, so I want to take a second just to give members of the advisory board a chance to reflect on the initiative, talk about kind of where they see it heading, and just provide any sort of context that's helpful. And I'll ask if you can raise your virtual hand, because we will have to unmute you. So if you would do that, we would love to hear about your experience on this advisory board. And I see Stacy Washington from South Carolina. So I'm going to unmute you, Stacy, and there we go.
Hello, everyone. I'm Stacy Washington with the South Carolina Energy Office. I was very excited to be part of this initiative and really fangirled when I got in. I was asked to be part of it and saw who was on the advisory board and the people that participated. This was a very educational experience for me. This is, a new territory for me and something I'm really interested in. So I really loved learning what the issues were and helping find solutions, and look forward to continuing working with SEEA in the future as we're trying to implement these solutions. But great process, great learning, and thank you all.
Thanks, Stacy. Any other advisory board members want to comment, or staff at App Voices or the Justice Center? I see a couple of y'all on the call as well.
Will, I saw Erin Rose raised her hand.
Yeah.
There's one other.
Let's see.
And Claire Williamson.
Yes. Erin, why don't we start with you?
Hi, everyone. This is Erin Rose. I'm with 3 Cubed, which is a research nonprofit located in Knoxville, Tennessee. And I just want to echo what Stacy said. And Stacy's brilliant and amazing, and I wouldn't have gotten to know her if it wasn't through this process. So I just want to talk again about how incredible this meeting of people was and this project as a gathering place for diverse stakeholders to really address this issue as a complex social issue. across the Southeast, and really focusing on the Southeast, I think, was another incredible opportunity to think about this issue here regionally, instead of at an aggregate across the country, because we do have unique issues and that are driving not just energy, but also utility insecurity here. And I think that the process for me was also important because it wasn't just a place to talk. It was a place to do, and it was very action oriented, and the way it was organized was very responsive, I think, to a lot of the recommendations and needs that were lifted up throughout the process. So I'm excited for Will to present the final product here, and what we all came together around. And so I just wanted to say I'm super grateful to be part of the process, and it was really special.
Thanks, Erin. Claire.
Good morning, y'all. Claire Williamson. I'm with the North Carolina Justice Center. And while we were one of the groups partnering with the Nicholas Institute, the project really wouldn't have been successful without all the other folks on the advisory board and the groups that participated. And during this process, one of the things I did was I helped facilitate the Utility Solutions Working Group. And I have to say it was such an extraordinary opportunity because we have utilities and advocates from all over the Southeast coming together. And we had this, Jen Weiss calls it the funnel, where we started really big, all these issues around utilities and how utilities can, are perpetuating energy insecurity or can help address it. And we started funneling it down and having these really direct and open conversations and talking through some of the issues. And I think I'm really proud of the work we came to, and that's just the start. And so I'm really excited. Thank you, SEEA, for carrying this on and for continuing these conversations, because I think they're so important to our region. And I'm just so excited for this next phase and to see what we create next.
Yeah, thanks, y'all. I will just reiterate, I think, what everyone has said. A couple of things really jumped out to me, during this process. And I think one is that this is really a historic moment. This is the first moment we've had a broad stakeholder collaborative intended to address energy insecurity across such a huge span of, region, 11 states, involving numerous sectors, numerous stakeholders, and I think it's really just remarkable the way that the Nicholas Institute was able to bring all these stakeholders together to discuss an issue that really is not just an energy issue. It's an issue of incomes. It's an issue of health. It's an issue of affordable housing. And so, really to fully address it, you have to engage in a number of different places and in a number of different ways. And I think that, I share Claire's enthusiasm for both the process that has happened and how we continue these conversations moving forward. And I think that's one thing I really want to talk about now is sort of, where did we land? And thank you to all of the advisory board members for your comments and thanks for your service. And I know we'll be seeing a lot more of you moving forward. Joy, if you could go to the next slide, I want to spend a few minutes just talking through kind of why SEEA, and then, where did we actually land with this? Because I think in a lot of ways, this initiative fits really closely with the work that we've been doing on energy insecurity. And I think it fits with our worldview about energy insecurity, that this is a problem that, yes, maybe has its roots in energy, but that has lots of other tendrils associated with it that we need to address. This is an issue that kind of spans multiple sectors, that requires engagement in multiple forums with multiple stakeholders. And I think that kind of really diverse, broad coalition that Duke put together for this initial phase gives us a really good foundation to do that. So just to review really briefly kind of some of SEEA's work on energy insecurity, and how this fits in. For the past 2 years or so, SEEA has been involved in an effort to map and understand the landscape of energy equity and energy insecurity throughout the 12 states of the South. And I say 12 because we've been doing this with a partner, and that is the Texas Energy Poverty Research Institute. So I'll give a shout out to Jackie and Andrew and Margot and Dana and everyone there who has been so instrumental in helping us think through energy insecurity and develop approaches to actually address it. One of those has been, we created a set of geospatial and interactive web-based tools generally. One is a geospatial data tool, the Energy Equity Inspector, which basically provides a really granular look at energy insecurity by different housing cohorts. We have data on housing, on health, on emissions. And really what that showed us is that buildings are a key to addressing this, and especially buildings that are lived in by low and moderate income households. And we can, we are now kind of engaged in an effort to direct federal investments into housing in several places throughout the South. Probably most notably, we're involved in an effort in the in the Alabama, rural Alabama, to direct some federal investments there. We also created another interactive tool, the Energy Equity Action Planner, which is a stakeholder identification tool, which really kind of walks through, who are the different stakeholders involved in energy insecurity? Who has decision-making power over which issues, and how do we begin to build a big tent to address these issues at scale across a region that's very diverse and has millions of people who are at risk for energy insecurity. So these two tools, really we're kind of moving from the research phase to the actual implementation phase of how this research begins to to affect the funding landscape of the region and the way we see opportunities in the region. Next slide, Joy. And we've combined that with kind of a number of other resources, some of which are kind of regular reports. So for instance, in 2020, we released a report on energy and security fundamentals. How do we conceptualize energy and security? How do we understand what that concept means? What are the dimensions of it? And then how does that apply to communities throughout the Southeast? We've also developed an interactive GIS story map that sheds light on the roots of energy insecurity, which is, lies deep in our region's history. And then we've written a lot about how affordable housing and other elements, really hinge on whether we can solve issues of energy insecurity throughout communities in our region. So these are just some of the resources that we've developed as we begin to think more about, as an organization, how do we engage in work that's, centered on addressing energy insecurity for communities throughout our region. And I really think, both the, kind of the thinking that we've done on this, but also the ways that it resonates with our concept of, kind of building a really big tent of stakeholders. I think we're all really excited about taking on this initiative, which kind of extends that work into new areas. Joy, next slide. Thanks. So I want to talk about some of the recommendations briefly that the that the stakeholder group developed. And, before I really dive into this, I want to note two things. One, that this is, all of these recommendations are devised from input from a diverse group of stakeholders, but they don't necessarily reflect full consensus of all stakeholders. So, I think that's just an important thing to note as we go through these. The second is that, the next phase of this project, and Cyrus Bedwar is going to be talking more about this as we move forward, but I just want to kind of flag this, but the next phase of the project really is beginning to identify which recommendations are actionable now and which ones we need to sort of build more expansive coalitions to begin to engage on, and then prioritize based on that. This is something we want your input on. So as I'm walking through these recommendations, I would certainly encourage you to think about which of these seem actionable, which of these do you know are maybe ongoing in our region at the moment, and where, or which of these are you interested in participating in as SEEA works to convene and build stakeholder coalitions that can actually move on these different recommendations. And I'll just note, there's recommendations from 6 working groups here that are thematic. At times they overlap each other, which I think is great because it shows, how each of these areas really shades into another and how these, issues of energy and security are really intertwined with each other. And again, I think reiterates the need for like broad stakeholder coalitions if we're gonna address these at scale. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so the first working group maybe is the broadest, and this is the systemic change working group, and it was really intended to look at kind of system level issues that are causing energy insecurity and to devise solutions to that. And I think what probably stands out to me the most here is the first recommendation that we need a regional coordinating committee to facilitate cross-sector collaboration among stakeholders working to address energy insecurity. I think this is one of the first things that SEEA is going to be working to do, is to build some sort of regional coordinating committee that can actually begin to identify stakeholders working in different areas, that can coordinate efforts, that can act as a central resource hub for information, data, best practices, to help address energy insecurity across the really diverse geographic and community territories that we serve. The working group also, identified that there's a need to address both to identify and address health and safety challenges that prevent access to energy assistance and identify weatherization cost savings, that too often we think in terms of energy costs and not human health and that type of thing. There's a need to expand community engagement opportunities and reduce barriers to representation in energy decision-making processes, really at all levels, at the Public Service Commission level, at the utility level, at the state level, and even at kind of at lower levels as well. The working group identified really, broad needs in democratizing access to decision-making for all communities across our region. And then finally, workforce development came up a lot and was key to, the broad system level issues that this working group saw. And the working group identified a need to create workforce development plans to ensure that the clean energy transition provides opportunities for energy insecure communities. Essentially, how do we ensure that communities that, potentially can be left behind in this energy transition, are not? And how do we use the new jobs in clean energy and energy efficiency to begin to make that change? Next slide, please. The housing working group identified 3 key recommendations. One was to improve housing codes and renter programs to lower energy costs without harmfully raising the cost of affordable housing. I think housing codes are not just building energy codes, but this could be qualified allocation plans. This could be kind of a range of other zoning issues. This could be a range of other approaches, but there's a need, specifically to address efficiency in housing and do that with an eye to renters. There's a need to increase access to weatherization and clean technologies in rental properties through existing home energy programs. And so, I think the working group really identified a need, that's not being met for renters in our region right now in existing programs. And then finally, to utilize existing and encourage new electric utility appliance programs to overcome barriers to affordable energy efficiency appliances. Essentially, how do we make sure that the most efficient appliances are getting to the homes of people who can least afford them? Next slide, please. The Awareness and Community Engagement Working Group developed 4 recommendations. The first one is to develop a public-facing one-stop shop that outlines and educates communities on which programs they are eligible to apply for, houses a centralized application for aid, and provides collaborative program implementation. Essentially addressing the fact that energy aid and energy assistance is very complex and confusing, even for people like us in the industry often. And, especially so for homeowners or renters who maybe are not familiar with energy efficiency programs that are available to them. So we need to, facilitate enhanced access to that information. And one best practice for that the working group identified as a one-stop shop for, information and applications itself. Again, speaking to that kind of education gap, the working group identified the need to develop a database of programs addressing energy insecurity in the Southeast. Essentially, what even is out there that, we can we can use to educate communities in our region about, what opportunities are there for them in terms of addressing, access to energy, providing bill assistance, that type of thing. Another recommendation that they came up with is to develop one centralized application for aid, starting with weatherization and urgent repair problems. This is kind of speaking to the high deferral rate in our region, often that prevents people with health and safety issues in their home from accessing energy efficiency assistance. And yet there's not much funding, or, there are a lot of kind of procedural barriers to accessing funding that could close that gap for homeowners and renters. And so a centralized application for aid that would, both provide weatherization assistance, but then help people get support to address health and safety challenges, if those are disqualifying them from energy efficiency and clean energy support. And then finally, an awareness campaign to educate energy insecure individuals and decision makers about, programs, about opportunities, and about resources that are available to them. Next slide, please. Data is a real need. I think this is one thing that the stakeholder group identified multiple times, that there's a need for, expanded data access and improvement. And so this group came up with 5 recommendations targeted around that area. One would be to require electric and gas utilities to collect, track, and report detailed data, including arrearages, late fees, and shutoffs, just to provide a more holistic understanding of what people in our region are experiencing, how crises like, say, the COVID-19 pandemic have impacted people's ability to pay their bills, and then, how can we support those communities through energy efficiency programs or other types of funding. Another recommendation was to develop a data dictionary to facilitate data requests for addressing energy insecurity. This is primarily for researchers to help understand, what types of data are available, what types of data are out there, and essentially to categorize the data that is available for researchers and advocates and other groups throughout the region, so that it, kind of facilitates the process of understanding and using that data to come to grips with what we're seeing throughout our region. To establish data sharing programs and develop a standard practice manual to guide and govern how data will be shared, what information can be shared, and how it will be used. Obviously, data always raises privacy issues, and I think we understand that, and we want to ensure that privacy concerns are not a problem, while ensuring that access to information is broad. And so, I think the intent of this is really to establish best practices for that, and agreements among all parties who are involved in both collecting, disseminating, and analyzing data to ensure that everyone is on the same page when it comes to privacy issues. To develop a process for community participation in identifying energy insecurity data needs. I think there's a real understanding that this process should not necessarily be driven by policymakers. It should come from communities and understanding, their needs for data and how that would be helpful. And so enhancing community participation in that process by, developing practices and procedures and facilitating requests by communities for data on energy insecurity. And then finally, I think more broadly, kind of requiring utility data collection and disparity gaps to understand, who are energy efficiency programs impacting, who are clean energy programs impacting, who is able to reap the benefits of those, and then, who in a particular service territory is experiencing energy insecurity, and how do we ensure that we're able to kind of close gaps in any disparities that we see in terms of, energy insecurity, those who experience energy insecurity and those who are able to access programs that could potentially be helpful. Next slide, please. And then financing is obviously a key part of this. And the Programs and Access to Financing Working Group came up with 3 recommendations. One was to review existing financial programs to make recommendations for revising or expanding. I think there was a real understanding that many of the energy efficiency or clean energy programs that are targeted at communities experiencing energy insecurity are small and not at scale. And so, one of the real challenges is how do we scale those programs, not just into the hundreds or thousands of household range, but into the millions of household range, given that we know that, that is the need in our region. And then another recommendation was to follow existing financial program best practices to accelerate energy efficiency and security. And finally, again, kind of calling out the gap for renters in our region to create programs specifically designed to help renters achieve energy security. So financing mechanisms that are not only available to homeowners, but also to renters who that can kind of move past the split incentive that landlords and renters have in funding and accessing the benefits of energy and security or energy efficiency. Next slide, please. And the last working group is the Utility Solutions Working Group, which was focused very much kind of at the utility level. And the first recommendation, I think, kind of follows from what we saw in the financial, the last working group, and that is to implement inclusive energy efficiency utility investments with robust consumer protections. And one of the ones that was flagged by this working group was pay as you save, a tariffed on bill method of financing that can work for both renters and homeowners and provides robust consumer protections because it is a tariff on the meter rather than a loan. Another item or another recommendation flagged by the Utility Solutions Working Group was to implement strong procedural protections, seasonal shutoff moratoria in times of heat or cold, protections for the socially vulnerable, and payment assistance programs to prevent disconnections from essential utility services. Another recommendation was to expand and implement non-energy benefits and energy efficiency cost effectiveness tests rather than just measuring, the kWh that are saved. It's also thinking more broadly about what are the non-energy benefits of energy efficiency and clean energy solutions. And then finally, to reduce future capacity needs through an aggressive pursuit of energy efficiency and peak reduction or peak demand reduction. Next slide, please. So just to kind of wrap up with that very quickly, I think there were 6 working groups, came up with a range of recommendations. Again, these range across the region. In some places, these are more feasible than in others. In some places, groups are already working to implement these. The solutions really range from vast system level approaches to more kind of granular fine-tuned approaches that are maybe going on at the moment. And so I think that is both an opportunity and a challenge. I think for us determining which recommendations to move on first is one of the first kind of orders of business for SEEA as we move into the implementation phase. And I think Cyrus is going to be talking a little bit about next steps to you now, but I want to flag that we certainly want your thoughts on this. This is something that we're going to be thinking through over the next few weeks and month, and we certainly want your input on how we approach that engagement. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cyrus to talk more about next steps and sort of how we would like to get your feedback on that process.
Thank you, Will. And good morning, everybody. It's so good to see so many familiar names and as well as new folks joining the conversation. As Will mentioned, my name is Cyrus Bedwar. I'm the Director of Energy Efficiency Policy for the Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance. And I want to start by thanking my colleagues, Will Bryan and Joy Ward, whom you see here on the screen. Will and Joy comprise SEEA's first ever research team, and they are a big part of the reason that SEEA is in a good position to inherit the incredible work that many of you have done through the Energy Insecurity Initiative. They have helped us develop skills and capacities to understand and share this information. Will pointed to several of those instances earlier in the presentation, but personally, I've learned so much from them, and they have helped SEEA step into this type of work in new and compelling ways, and I'm really excited about what's to come. So just want to acknowledge them. And I want to acknowledge all of you. This has been a tremendous initiative to watch. I was not a part of the phase led by the Nicholas Institute, but really want to applaud their leadership, the leadership and attention that the funders gave this effort to properly resource it, as well as the contributions that each and all of you made as stakeholders in the initiative. So thank you all. So in terms of next steps, next slide, Joy, please. The first thing we'll do is get you out a final copy of the report. We're putting the finishing touches on it, and you will receive it very shortly. It will be a much more detailed account of the recommendations, as well as some of the background on energy insecurity that Will has discussed to this point. Following that, we are in the process of developing a website to serve as a platform and hub for the ongoing work under this initiative. And we intend that to be a place where resources can be accumulated, stakeholders can connect, and we can share information about the current status of what's going on to address energy insecurity in the region. The exciting part of the next phase for me is going to be implementation. As Will pointed in closing of his remarks, we are eager for this, as we so often say, for this not to be a report that sits on the shelf. So SEEA is going to be working over the next weeks and months with many of you to determine what that looks like. From our perspective, one of the key opportunities, one of the key timely opportunities, is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill. There are a lot of resources that are going to be provided through that. And our intention is to review the recommendations in the initiative and pick one or two that can be supported with those resources to bring them into life. And so that's going to take some work in terms of defining what progress or success looks like for those respective initiatives, determining who is willing and able to play a role in advancing them. So those are the sorts of things that we are going to be working on over the next few weeks and months with your help. And I'm not sure if we dropped it in the chat yet, but we've got a survey that will help us identify those of you who are interested in working on this and where work is currently going on. So we'll hope you take a moment to respond to that survey either now. It'll also be sent in the follow-up materials as well. But with that, I think we're ready to go to Q&A. And so next slide. So if you can drop your questions in the chat or Q&A, I see some are coming in already, and I think some of my colleagues are answering them. So let me just going back up through the questions.
And I'll flag while Cyrus is doing that. Joy has also dropped into the chat a link to a survey. You know, we'd love to hear from you, how you'd like to be involved moving forward. We also have a slide that will cover this as well as we kind of close out, but there's a link to the survey there, and you can indicate, you know, how you'd like to be involved moving forward, and we will be happy to reach out to you as those come in and as we go.
Thanks, Will. So I'm just gonna read this question from Shelley Robbins in South Carolina. On the issue of reducing expensive and dirty peak demand, are advocates starting to expand the definition, expand the energy efficiency definition to include renewable energy and battery storage that specifically benefits low-income communities? Battery storage and solar plus storage reduce peak while also increasing the resiliency of a community during and after increasingly severe climate-related threats. So thank you, Shelley, for that question. That is absolutely the type of question we will be posing back to the stakeholder community as we engage in the clarification and implementation of these recommendations. So we look forward to engaging with you to look at that. Let's see, going back to the chat to see what other questions we have.
Yeah, Cyrus, I can flag one for you. I see that Mary Cromer has a question about what kind of capacity would be required for serving on the committee mentioned in the survey, and you know, sort of what we're looking for there.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Mary. I think we're having one-on-one conversations with existing advisory group members. We recognize there's a tension here. There's an interest in, you know, realizing some of these recommendations, so making progress on them. And that's kind of the short-term work. We're going to be looking at readily available opportunities, initiatives that are already underway that we can supplement and support and expand. But we also recognize that energy insecurity is not going to be solved in a couple of years, if ever. So we are trying to understand what sort of mechanisms we can build for the long term. As an organization, SEEA tends to take a long-term view of the work we do. And so we are trying to be thoughtful about the capacity that you have to give, the resources that are going to be required, and the type of support that we can provide in order to help us all make progress on this important activity. So if you're interested, please respond to the survey and we will be in touch. And I think it'll be an interactive conversation rather than an answer from us in terms of what sort of capacity you have and what sort of capacity we see are valuable for advancing this initiative. So I'll leave it there. I see earlier up, Mary, you also asked a question of do we have a list of all the groups we worked on in each state? And I'm going to turn to Will, who is a member of the advisory group, to respond to that.
We do, yeah, and we're happy to provide those and use those kind of to start thinking about who is not here that needs to be. I think that's certainly a question that we have. The original initiative, we had more than 60 stakeholders, but at the same time, there's a lot of stakeholders involved in these questions, right? So one piece of feedback that we would like, and we can certainly follow up with that information in our kind of follow-up email to you. But one piece of information I think that we would love would be, who needs to be here that you don't see in the room.
And Nancy, I see your question about TVA, and I'll kind of reflect back to Will's response there. If there are stakeholders who were not in the first round that you think should be, we'd love to hear that from you. And we are planning to reach out, engage. We see a number of local government stakeholders who may be interested in working on this. And so SEEA is going to leverage its network in addition to taking your recommendations on that.
And Cyrus, I see a question from Daniel Pate about the timeline for phase 3. I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are initially working on a 12-month timeline that's already begun for implementation. So Daniel, as I mentioned, that tension between moving some of these recommendations towards implementation while also building a long-term vehicle to sustain the activity in this arena that so many stakeholders seem interested in. And so the concrete timeline is 12 months, and then we very much hope and will be working to sustain the effort beyond that. And I see Commissioner Sullivan, thank you. We would love to have that conversation with you. So Commissioner Sullivan is with the Department of Consumer Affairs in South Carolina, and they intervene in rate cases for individual consumers. And he's interested in understanding whether DCA should join SEEA and this initiative. And we will be happy to reach out to you if you can provide your contact information via the survey and have that conversation. Thank you so much for raising your hand. I'm seeing a couple of questions by Gabe. If you could speak to opportunities to utilize vehicle to building microgrids through bidirectional charging, I'd be interested to know more. Continuing that question, would participating utilities allow for behind the meter systems so that individual buildings can optimize energy use? Alternatively, allowing sites to participate in net metering that would allow the use of EVs as an energy storage system that could feed back into the grid. Would the utilities be open to this? So Gabe, you're asking a lot of great questions that we will absolutely be happy to consider as we move forward with implementation of recommendations, as well as expansion of them. I think a lot of them have a lot of room to go in different directions, and we are going to be looking for the stakeholders' direction on what are the most interesting and available opportunities to take these. So thank you for those contributions. Will, Joy, I'm seeing that we've answered as many questions as have come through as well as we can at this time. Yep. So with that, shall I turn it over to Joy to wrap us up?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. As we mentioned at the top, a recording of today's presentation and the slide deck will be emailed to all registrants. Please also give us feedback about today's presentation in a follow-up survey and let us know how we did. Have a wonderful day and remember to sign up for updates on receiving more information about upcoming events, including the 2022 Southeast Energy Summit in October. And you'll see in the chat, I will be putting in those links as well. Hope everyone has a wonderful day and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, y'all.